Good evening. I'm happy to join you tonight to talk about practical approaches to improving hay quality. My name is Jimmy Henning, and I'm a forage specialist at the University of Kentucky. I want to walk through several things that I think apply to getting a good cutting of hay. And number one is a good forage stand. And the target there is to get and to maintain a thick stand of desirable forage species like this novel endophyte tall fescue field in Madison County. I want to focus on one particular part of getting a good stand and keeping a good stand as it relates to hay quality, and that is don't skimp your way to a problem, and I'm talking about the fertility. I'm running into more and more cases where we see a soil test like this, where the phosphorus is adequate to high, but the potassium is extremely low. And the pH may or may not be bad, but the point I want to make is get a soil test. If you don't have a soil test, you don't have a strategy for keeping your forage stand vigorous, and it's almost like having two strikes against you before you start to make hay. I want to remind you that one of the reasons why that we are seeing these low potash numbers is the fact that we remove potassium at about 3 times the rate that we do phosphorus in a ton of hay. And if we're not putting it back in that ratio, then typically we are removing more than the soil is able to supply, and you will see a drop in soil test potassium numbers. I want to focus on one particular small demonstration study that we did in Powell County over the last 3 years, and we had fertility treatments on this low potassium site from no treatment at all to very high rates of nitrogen, replacement rates of phosphorus, and high rates of potassium. And what you see in front of you is one of the high fertility areas, and I'll outline that with my cursor, in the fall compared to some of the lower fertility areas to the left and to the right. And you can obviously see that this field started out with a major broomsedge problem, and on those unfertilized or not well fertilized plots, we still had it. Then you might argue that those fertility rates were too high to be affordable, and you might be right. But what I want to show you is that we saw considerable effects of the NP and K in the very first year of fertilization alone. If you look at the graph on the left, we had about 1.6 tons of total yield per acre with no fertility at all. With adequate NP and K, we had 3.8 tons. But the real surprise to us was the percent broomsedge in that very first year. Where we had adequate NP and K, we only had 14% broomsedge stand. Where we had no additional NP and K, the stand was 90% broomsedge, and that's 90% broomsedge by weight, as measured in the October harvest. And one other thing that we saw, we had treatments in this study that had the potassium and the phosphorus, or the P and the K, but no nitrogen. Now, and we did not add any clover to this trial, but look at the clover numbers on the plots that had P and K, but no nitrogen applied. You can see that where we had no NP or K, that we had 10 to 14%, 10% the first year, 14% the next. Where we had adequate P and K, we had 28% volunteer red clover the first year, 65% volunteer red clover the second year, and that's by visual analysis. One of the practical steps to getting good hay is controlling weeds. And weed control is certainly about product, but it's also about timing. And I'm choosing to show you a picture of buttercup here because buttercup is one of those weeds that once you see it, and you know you see it, most of the time it is past time to do anything about it. And I want to highlight a publication that I think you ought to have and keep close by, and that's AGR 207, Broadleaf Weeds of Kentucky Pastures. It has pictures on the front, and that's good, but really the real important part is on the back, where it lists the weeds and the preferred time of treatment and the product And I've circled buttercup, and you can see that the preferred treatment time is February and March, and there are quite a few choices for herbicides that give good control. Now, of course, the challenge with using herbicides in February or March is catching that warm day where the temperatures are warm enough for the herbicide to be active. But I just want to make the point that if weed control is not about seeing it and then spraying, but knowing when to look for it and when to spray. And of course, one of the very major things about getting a good hay cutting or a good high quality hay is to cut early. And of course, if you've been to any forage meeting probably ever that talked about hay, we talk about the fact that stage of maturity is the big factor. It is the most important factor affecting forage quality. And we want to try to catch the forage at that changeover from vegetative to reproductive, like you see on the right with that pearl millet plant. Now, I want to acknowledge that this is a complex thing. If it was easy, anybody could have done it. But I also want to acknowledge that the reason why we don't get that done many times is because there are many things competing for your top priority on the farm. And this picture of tobacco being set and then cutting your hay crop just reminds me of that. Now, we have less competition from tobacco on many of our farms than we used to, but many things will compete for your time. And I also want to say that just because this farmer in this particular picture is cutting hay that's mature, that does not mean it's bad hay. There are no bad hays, only bad diets. Sometimes we do need to make cow hay, but the big mistake is not to test it, and the big mistake is not to feed appropriately. So there are no bad hays, just bad diets. And of course, I really want to acknowledge that the enemy of cutting early or cutting on time is rain. Now, rain is good. I'd hate to buy in the form of irrigation all of the moisture that we get in Kentucky in a year. It'd be nice to time it a little better for sure, but first cuttings are hurt by rainfall, and that's one of our biggest challenges to cutting early. I've got 5 strategies or 5 ideas I'd like to share with you about avoiding rain damage, and none of them are foolproof, but they may resonate with you and help you to devise a strategy that will help you have better hay across the board. Number 1, be ready early. There have been several years where, and nearly every year, there's a pattern of good weather in that late April or early May where there's some few good days or a few days in a row of good sunshine and temperatures. And if you're ready to cut hay and can lay it down then we have a better chance of getting it up. You might want to consider hay preservatives. These are not simple or cheap to use, and they're only good for that moisture range that's just above our safe baling moistures. The products that you would then use that are most research proven are the propionic acid products, but they will help you avoid heating and molding in hay that's just slightly above safe baling moisture. And of course, making haylage is an option, and we know that making haylage is one of the very best ways to avoid rain damage and not need 4 curing days in a row. Another thing that you might consider is, over time, changing to a summer forage for hay. That may be, if you are in the southern part of the state, you may choose to use Bermuda grass. You may choose to invest in getting a native warm season grass. Maybe alfalfa that you might make baleage with in the first cutting and then use those summer cuttings then for some of your higher quality hay needs. And the last one is manage for a fall hay cutting. It seems to be happening more and more frequently that we get enough rainfall and good weather in the fall that we're able to put up quite a lot of high quality hay, high quality grass hay in particular, in the fall. Another way, and it's a very important way to raise your quality of your hay, is to use legumes. Now, legumes are like your secret weapon, and here's why I say so. We want to add legumes to hay fields because they are high yielding, especially the tall growing legumes like red clover and alfalfa. Red clover and alfalfa and white clover too will add nitrogen to the soil. Now they don't do it immediately; they do it over time, and it's recycled, not just shared directly with the grass. But they do add nitrogen to the system. And they give us not only yield, but they give us seasonal yield. They're more productive in summer than typically our grasses are. They are of course, higher in protein and especially higher in energy. And red clover in particular has, as we are learning, high quantities of the isoflavone biocanon A, which is able to directly offset the vasoconstriction problems associated with grazing or eating toxic tall fescue. So legumes are an important strategy in your practical ways to improve hay quality. And I want to mention quickly too that our manipulation of hay is going to matter, how we manipulate it. Tedding and raking carefully is important. Of course, tedders are instruments that we use to fluff up the hay and get more air movement throughout the swath. And of course, we need to use rakes, whether they're wheel rakes or bar rakes, to move the forage into a windrow for baling. But I want to at least remind you that we want to manipulate the hay when there is some moisture present, because as you can see in this picture, when we are raking hay, like this alfalfa grass hay on our research farm in Lexington, when it is pretty dry, you can see that cloud of dust behind the tractor, and that's actually little fine leaf particles. So when we manipulate it too dry, we have larger amounts of leaf shatter, and the leaf is where the high quality materials are. One of the practical concerns we don't want to forget about is to manage storage losses. And managing losses in storage is a multifaceted task. And it starts with actually baling it as the correct moisture content, because we know that the wetter we put up hay, the more the storage loss. And we know we lose the percent storage loss that we have is going to be equal to the difference between the moisture at baling and the equilibrium moisture that the hay gets down to. Managing storage losses, though, most of the time is managing weather damage. And I gotta love the producer in Cumberland County that the top picture was taken where he had the commitment that he was going to stop that rain from getting into his hay bales or her hay bales by putting tin over it and weighting that down with rocks. Unfortunately, we're learning that most of the moisture then comes in from the bottom parts of the bale. So a strategy of putting something under the bales, like the tires in the picture below, is actually more sound than stopping the rain from coming in from the top. The picture on the bottom, of course, she's using net wrap as well, and net wrap also sheds some water compared to twine alone. But covered storage, of course, is best, and where you have been able to build many of these hoop structures across Kentucky, and they are excellent for storing hay. And the last point I want to make is to feed the forage efficiently. Don't do all the work to get good hay, get it put away, get it put in the barn, and then give it away when we feed it. And I just want to highlight some extremes possibly in hay feeding and losses. Certainly a lot of loss in the picture at the top, and then a hay ring feeder, which is good, or a ring feeder that has sheeting around the bottom, which is even better. But there are many ways to feed hay, and there are reasons to do so. The point that I think we want to make here is that choose the one that works for your system, that allows you to get the most advantage from the work that you have done to create and to harvest and to store good hay. So when you talk about practical approaches to improving hay quality, here are my list of things to do. Get and maintain a good forage stand. Cut as early as you can. Use legumes wherever possible. Don't ted and don't rake or don't manipulate the hay when it's too dry. Use the proper storage, the best you can get, and feed it efficiently. Thank you very much.